Welcome, everyone. My name is Merill Comeau. I'm an independent artist and a member of the SDA Events Committee. SDA is a membership nonprofit focused on fiber and contemporary art, fiber and textile art. I'm delighted to welcome you to this week's Textile Talk, which is Hunter-Gatherer, Performance Art and Natural Dyes. Textile Talk webinars are brought to you by the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and Surface Design Association. First, a few housekeeping announcements. This is a webinar. Your screens and mics are not active or showing. We welcome questions, which we will answer at the end of both of the artist presentations today. Please submit them in the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We're honored to bring you free and inspiring Textile Talks programming, and we respectfully ask you to be courteous as you engage with speakers, moderators, and other participants. Your chat comments can be seen by everyone. So please use the Q&A for questions, the chat box for greeting others, and survey for commentary or ways we can improve. If you prefer not to see the notifications from chat, you can click on the chat button to toggle them on or off. So today we are celebrating the Spring 2024 Surface Design Journal Hunter-Gatherer, which is in exploring the intersections of performance and natural dyes with artists Pachia, Vang, and Dina, Nazmi, Khorchid. As Surface Design Journal editor Elizabeth Kozlowski writes, as hunter-gatherers, our paleolithic forebearers foraged natural resources until about 12,000 years ago, when archaeological evidence of agriculture practices started to appear. Our nomadic lifestyle waned as humans built permanent settlements and domesticated plants and animals. In this issue of the Surface Design Journal, there are highlights. It highlights the relationship between performance art and natural dyes, a relationship that centers on beauty, ritual, and tradition. Combining these two practices is a way to honor our natural world. SDA journals are published quarterly and available in full color print publications and in digital form. So our first presenter today is Dina Nazmi Khorchid. Dina works primarily with printed and woven textiles. She is a third-generation refugee and explores themes of identity and geopolitics, domesticity, land and memory access. In relation to being a Palestinian artist, Dina has led participants through symbolic cooking projects employing food culture to explore issues of politics, waste material, and to perform a passionate statement of existence. Dina completed a Master of Fine Arts in Textiles at the Rhode Island School of Design and had her work showcased in the USA, Tunisia, UAE, and Lebanon. So welcome, Dina, and let's have you share your work.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all the participants. It's really nice to see so many people who have tuned in on here from different places. I'm Dina, and I'm talking to you from Providence, Rhode Island. I'll run you through some of my work, and more specifically, my work that's featured in the Surface Design Journal, the upcoming spring issue. Mark making and drawing are tools that I utilize a lot in my work that end up coming to life in fabric installations. Through working with certain symbolism, I gain a better understanding of my relationship with trauma and displacement and reclaiming identity as a Palestinian artist and a daughter of a disappeared war casualty. You'll see in the slideshow some pigeons and then some trees. And these are elements that have been coming in and out of my practice as a way to remain rooted to certain things. I inherited from my father a Lebanese travel document for Palestinian refugees in place of a passport, some personality traits as described by others who knew him, and a letter that became an important cornerstone in my journey into art making, and a creation of a metaphor, which is the pigeon. In his letter to his family, I was 3 years old at the time, and it roughly translates from Arabic, and it says, Dina's growing up every day, and just yesterday she was drawing a pigeon, and has the tongue of an adult and the intellect of an adult. So really touched by his words, I connect back to his memory through my practice and to a larger connection to my home country, to Palestine, and not being able to access that land. So for instance, what you're seeing on screen right now is a hand-woven piece called I Close My Eyes and Float. And it explores the idea of closing one's eyes when anxious and thinking of a place that feels better than where you are in that moment. And to me, that's always water, which you'll see in other elements of my work. And it's also a reference of the Dead Sea, which I was able to see on a trip to Jordan. And that was the closest I've ever been to Palestine, and saw my homeland in the distance. Other elements that come into my work are sort of this idea of a curtain being a barrier and being an entry point to allow someone into a private space or to block certain things. So this curtain in the form of a large-scale textile installation that has a dark atmosphere to it, and an emotive atmosphere, with elements of nature and trees, and sort of going into a forest in search of answers. This is more of my sort of things that I'm exploring at the moment as a way to remain grounded. You'll see on the screen right now is another iteration of that, and it's called Land Untitled. This is a jacquard woven fabric. So alongside working in digital printing, natural and non-natural dyes, I also enjoy weaving on a floor loom and on a jacquard industrial loom, and being able to see different pieces come to life in fiber brings it really close to home, and brings my work closer to my heritage, and the idea of movement and carrying fabrics and immigration with us wherever we go. For the hunter-gatherer issue of the Surface Design Journal, I've been sort of working on a project called Amsakhan Ceremony, and this project explores food culture, politics, natural waste, and art making in a somewhat performative textiles installation. I was on a recent trip to Oaxaca in Mexico for a residency at Teixeira Fiber Residency, where this project really came to life after an on and off year of trying to find sumac all over Rhode Island and then Vermont, and finally gathering and collecting those berries that tie back to a specific dish from back home. If we move on to the next slide, this dish is called msakhan, and to many it's described as the national dish of Palestine. Msakhan in Arabic, also in a literal translation of the word, means heated, in reference to these ingredients that are heated and made separately and then brought together. And those ingredients are a lot of sumac, a lot of olive oil, and bread, and chicken. So I wanted to find parallels in cooking this dish that reminds me of cooking with my mother and being back home, and also pine nuts as another ingredient, and trying to mimic that as a fabric through bundle and eco-dyeing. So dyeing the fabric with sumac, onion skins, and pine cones was my way to experiment with that. And in a similar way to cutting up pieces of bread in a triangular form and putting those ingredients inside and then rolling it and then cooking it, I did the same with smaller pieces of fabric, as you'll see on the next slide, by placing onion skins, sumac, pine cones into pieces of fabric, rolling them, steaming them, and then allowing the process of bundle dyeing to take place and leave traces and marks on fabric that could resemble bruises or traces of a memory or wind, or bring it back to nature. And I also really enjoyed the way those food rolls that are edible very much resemble a rolled piece of fabric, as you can see in the images on display. So I had a sort of an intimate dinner gathering, displaying both the rolled food, let's call them soldiers, and the fabric bundles side by side along the length of a table that also had tablecloths that I dyed the same way or submerged in onion skin water and things along those lines to bring it together with a gathering of friends with traditional music playing in the background as a way to show resistance and reclaim land through food and art. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dina. So our next presenter today is Pachia Lucy Vang. Pachia is a textile artist and design educator whose work is informed by a pluriversal imagination centering on padao, or flower cloth, and indigenous diasporic perspectives. Her practice focuses on crafting experiences within and beyond the gallery, extending into community spaces to preserve Hmong ways of knowing. Vang currently teaches at the University of California, Davis, and is the founder of Culture Through Cloth, a studio providing Padao circles programming to the public. She is a second-generation Hmong American who has lived and traveled throughout the Hmong diaspora in Asia. And Pachia, let's have you share your work.
Hello, everyone. So thank you so much for having me to give me some time to share a bit about myself. I am an artist and a designer, and I very much, through these roles, am fascinated with textiles, looking at it through a Hmong perspective, through my Hmong ancestry and heritage, that I am finding is very connected with the world. So I just want to share some insights into my practice. So my practice very much is centered around bandao, which means flower cloth or Hmong textiles. It's a practice that's been practiced in the Hmong community for generations. And it's also very integral to being Hmong through art, through fashion, and through preserving knowledge. And so my art practice very much encompasses an art practice, a social practice, along with an educational practice that's tied with making textiles, exhibiting textiles, thinking about it, and sharing space. And the word bandao, or flower cloth, very much conjures up this connection to nature and to the natural world, but also ndao means cloth, and it can also refer to paper or text. And so there's this idea of textiles and textile as code that I've been experimenting with and thinking quite a lot about as well through my work. A part of retaining these meanings behind flower cloth can be seen through the project that's featured in the upcoming edition of Surface Design Association's journal, Hunter Gatherer. This is a project titled Bay, They, They, Bay, which is a call to land. And what I do is I create QR textiles using bandao techniques, such as cross-stitching and applique and reverse applique. And so for those of you who are familiar with bandao, the forms are very geometric in nature. And many of these forms are used for different rituals like funerary processes. And so the specific textile that I'm responding to with this piece is actually considered plots of land, or a type of map that the deceased will take with them into the ancestral life. And so playing on this code-like form, I'm also thinking about the types of codes that we encounter in our everyday life. The commonness of the QR code and the bandao that people often overlook, but have these really powerful abilities to connect us to spiritual and virtual digital spaces. And so for this particular project, I thought very much about natural dyes and how I could root these pieces very much in land. So I used earth as a mordant, and then I used different types of roots like turmeric and madder, along with silk and along with metals. And when you scan these QR codes, then you're taken to this digital landscape that's connected to a wall that is connected to a curatorial project I've done called Cloth is Land, Hmong Indigeneity. And this exhibition was done in connection with the John Michael Kohler Art Center in Wisconsin. And so moving a bit more into my social, curatorial, educational practice, the Cloth is Land project very much highlights many items from the John Michael Kohler Art Center's collection that was acquired in the 1980s. But alongside that, it features my work along with the work of 3 Hmong American artists, Derzong, Pahuaher, and Chaher. And as the title shares, this exhibition is focused on examining the Hmong people's connection to land. As a stateless people, our indigeneity is often contested because of our displacement throughout the globe. And so while we don't have one country or one place that we can call our own, we've actually built this notion of country and place and land and identity and heritage into our clothing, which we very much embody by wearing. So these ideas behind the Cloth is Land show then very much inform a next project that I'm working on, which also continues to work with natural dyes by foraging for colors in my natural environment. And so the colors red and green, or very much pink and green, are very prevalent in Hmong clothing and textiles. And this is because we actually document the crossing of the red and green rivers through these colors we wear, which mark a moment in time where we left the homelands of China into Southeast Asia. And so for this project and in dialogue with other Indigenous artists throughout California, we're really exploring local waterways and thinking about what it means to create these embodied forms of mapping. And so I'm exploring the Sacramento and American rivers, which meet in Sacramento, where I'm from. And through this exploration, I'm experimenting with different types of found materials to dye with. And right now, my foray is centering around the privet berry and the toyon berry, with both create a type of green and pink dye. One is actually an invasive species and the other is a native species. I'm thinking about how I can utilize these colors in connection with the black colors of native oak galls and acorns to create this large, immersive, cube-like textile installation that will feature traditional Hmong motifs. And so a lot of my interest in natural dyes have been just a recent development, rooted in some research projects that I did in 2022 and 2023. I worked closely with some undergraduate students at UC Davis who were extracting dyes from sea urchin quills to test the colors, which was really fun. And this led me to becoming really interested in eco-printing, very much like Dina as well, and thinking about how I could create floral prints with objects from nature, with plants, with leaves. So I've experimented here with onion skins, with eucalyptus, with avocado, cochineal, urchin, some of the house plants like the purple Charlie plant, which produces this very vibrant pink that I love. And all of this really much stems out of my recent education very much in surface pattern designs. And so I actually took a surface pattern design course a few years ago with Professor Susan Avila at UC Davis, which I now teach. I'm currently in the process of teaching this course as well, and thinking about how we can take inspiration appropriately from cultural textiles and garments that do not misappropriate. And so these are some examples from my own time going through that course and applying this methodology to different forms of bandao, because bandao is so diverse, from other groups of Hmong people throughout China who also make bandao that I don't know much about, since I work very much with the bandao from my lineage. But I am currently interested in returning to a fashion practice. I was making a lot of hand embroidered earrings prior, and marketing them through culture through cloth. And this kind of return to these types of products very much is in connection to this endeavor that I have to turn culture through cloth into more of a community studio space, and thinking about how we can reclaim the art form for the people and for the community, and for women who no longer know how to make it. And so one way that we're currently doing that is through these bandao sewing circles, or these bandao circles, where I'm working with Hmong women and closely with an elder, Luli, in my community to teach the 3 different types of bandao that I have been talking about. And so that includes cross-stitch embroidery. We recently wrapped up applique. And then this weekend, we're actually going to learn how to do reverse applique, and we will be doing batik in August. And these classes or these sessions are open to the public and are funded by the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, located in Sacramento. And so that's just a brief overview of my practice, and I'm really grateful to be here and to share space with all of you. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Very interesting, both of you. And we do have some questions in the Q&A, which include one from Carol. Dina, what kind of fabric did you use with the sumac steam printing, and was it mortared?
I used several fabrics like linen, silk, and cotton. And I work in a very sort of intuitive way, not following things too closely to a recipe, which could be problematic, but I really enjoyed it in this process of like seeing what will happen. So in some of them I used alum, and others I soaked them in vinegar.
And Pachia, you use a mordant with the earth. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was really interested in actually trying to dye with earth, but it wasn't producing the vibrant colors that I wanted. And I very much realized that this red earth was filled with a lot of iron. And so in that way, I kind of reframed the way I was understanding how I was using the earth. And I realized that it could actually be used as a type of mordant. And I was using silk.
Terrific, thank you. All right, also for Pachia, can you, there's a quick question from Tony that is, if the Hmong people were not displaced, where would they be living?
Yeah, that's a super hard question because we're scattered throughout the lands of China and Southwest China. But, you know, I think different subgroups of people, different lineages kind of trace their roots back to different places. And so my family, for example, would trace our roots back to Yunnan province. But, you know, different groups might trace that back to Guizhou province. And so it's kind of a blurry area, but we do say that we are indigenous to China.
Okay. All right. As long as we're talking about this sort of idea of lineage and do we know our lineage, Robert is asking for both of the artists is whether there's a lineage in your cultures of that that is related to performance art or artists that you are inspired or feel connected to. Dina, do you want to start off that one?
Sure. I think one of the most prevalent forms of that would be traditional Palestinian embroidery. It's very much something that is similar to recipes passed down to generations. a lot of, and it's usually a lot of like a woman's practice too, currently in a lot of refugee camps spread across the Arab world. And in my own personal like family, I would say like my brother does some calligraphy. There is an artistic side, I think from my late father as well. But yes, that's as much as I can think of in this moment.
That's a good lineage. Pachia?
Yeah, very much in the same way. I think, the practice of bandao is a performative practice as well as a type of performance, even in how you should sit to hold your fabric or how you should sit to hold your threads. My grandmother used to always sit on a very low stool, and she would sit by the door to catch the light of the sun. And that form of sitting, is really conducive to being able to embroider for long amounts of time, because you can rest your arms in your lap. And so there's all these like embodied forms of performance in the act of creating textiles and clothes, which I find very interesting. And just thinking more about performance as well with the QR code, there's a type of performance people have to do to the act of scanning, right? The act of taking out your phone and scanning to connect, which I was really interested in, because I recall when the QR code first appeared, if you would just see a random QR code, you'd be inclined to, want to scan it. And I don't know if that still applies for younger folks now that it's so common, but I often think back to those early memories of the QR code.
Well, we're with you, Pachia. Could you speak a little bit more about the issue of cultural appropriation and do's and don'ts? Glass is asking.
Yeah, I think it's a really complex issue that doesn't have a one size fit all response or solution. And it varies from case to case, right? That's something that I talk about with my students, and something that's written quite a lot about when you look into the topic of cultural appropriation. But appropriation has been happening across time, and so I think the question is, what is appropriate to appropriate versus what is inappropriate to appropriate. And so, when we ask that, then we have to kind of look at histories of displacement, histories of power dynamics, and also, who's benefiting or gaining out of the appropriation and who's not. And so I think that's also why my practice kind of has this product-based, fashion-based part, because in some ways I'm hoping that we can change the ways people understand Hmong textiles and Hmong art to better appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Do you sometimes see work that you think is inspired by cultural expressions, but has been reinterpreted in a way that you think is an okay thing to do? Or do you really feel like to be inspired by another culture's patterns, for instance, and then to repeat them in a way that's more of the artist's own language? Is that a borrowing that bothers you?
I think, it would have bothered me earlier on in my life, perhaps. I think now I'm becoming maybe more familiar with it and maybe more comfortable with it. As an artist, also because I borrow, but I think, it is a context by context based thing. I work with students who are, being inspired by different pieces, and I do want to encourage them not to take directly, but to take inspiration in whatever ways that is, whether that's through the meaning of the textile, whether that's through the color of the textile. But very much so, it's also paying homage to this lineage and to this history and to where the textile is coming from, that I think is really important, and to acknowledge that as the artist and the maker, and to include that in some ways, which I think many people can appreciate simply just an honorable mention in that way.
Yes, thank you. I know this is a real challenge, and I think people need to understand the gray area of it, and the difference between borrowing and being inspired, or admiring, but coming back to your own practice and expressing things in your own way.
Mhm.
Going back to Dina, I just wanted to ask Dina, I know that the symbolic use of food, and it can include the symbol like of the olive tree, for instance. And what I wondered, when is there an element of the ingestation of the food itself that you think has a particular meaning for you to be eating those particular foods?
Yeah, I think if you ask any Palestinian about their connection to land, they will tell you about the olive trees and how they stand resilient in the face of occupation and agricultural oppression, and how important our olive oil is. We take so much pride. We travel with it, we gift it to each other. I remember growing up, my family would receive like a large sort of tin of olive oil, and we'd share it across the family members. And it's such a precious thing to consume, and also to think about in a more conceptual way of relating to a place, of holding dear anything that comes out of an inaccessible land. And yeah, I think there's a lot of metaphors and a tangible connection to that sort of indigenous desire to return to a place through food, through cooking, through community, through coming together.
And then another question I would have is, do the fabrics have a scent? Because the smell of things can really take me back somewhere.
Definitely, they do. They have hints of the onion, I think, the most. And every time I would iron or press the fabrics, that kind of comes back. It's very subtle, but it requires like an intimate proximity. And I think that's a really, really special thing, that fabrics can hold scent and memory, and wrinkles and all that kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. And Eileen is asking both of you, do you use anything to set your dyes so they will not run or fade?
As mentioned, I felt like vinegar worked for me. However, I was also interested in the aspect of fading after some time passes and allowing the fabrics to sort of age, in relation to the kind of things that I'm working with memory and with loss.
Mm. So we do have a question about the programming that's coming up, Pachia, but it has somehow dropped out of the Q&A. So I'm wondering if people would like to learn more about the programming that's coming up. You mentioned one program in August and so forth. Where would they look for that information?
They can actually go to my website, which is www.culturethroughcloth.com. And then you can register to get emails.
Terrific. Oh, no, wait, that's it. Okay. Those are the Q&A. So I have a few questions I would like to ask you as well, which what I think is interesting is that you're talking about things that some of them are I would say are universalities, that people long for the place from which they've come. And yet there are such enormous distinctions. So the two of you have really different and distinct things that you're thinking about, you're seeing, you're expressing, different visuals and different practices. And I wonder about this idea of keeping alive culture by bringing this up from the past. And how do you reconcile history or tradition with your contemporary life? Are there ways that you work through that? Well, either one. Here's another question. You can be thinking about it. What age were you when you realized that you had an ancestry and a culture that you didn't want to have it buried in whatever country you were living in. Was there an age when you became aware?
I think it was at a very young age. I can't put a specific number to it, so I'm just gonna throw out like maybe 5 or 6 years old. When you grow up in a different country that is not your own, I think a lot of people share the same sentiments. You know that you're somewhere else, you know that your food might be different than others. The language you speak at home is different than the language you speak outside, or the dialect in my case. So I think that came about at a very young age. I grew up in Abu Dhabi in the Emirates and later on in Lebanon. And even though both are Arab countries, there are differences to the cultures. And I thought, like, I feel really grateful that I was able to embrace my own culture while learning and being surrounded by other people's cultures as in close proximity as friends, and being really having an open viewpoint to where and who is around. Yeah.
So being aware of the tradition, that really sort of answers my last question, which is, how do you make peace with with your tradition, with your contemporary life? And for you, it's really a feeling of gratitude. It's a gift. You feel that it's a gift to you.
Yeah, I think it's something that is always there. Even though I've never been to Palestine, for instance, I very much say I'm Palestinian and feel it and try to keep it alive. I think mostly through cooking, to be honest, through the foods. And then with my art practice, it's this broader idea of what it means to relate to a place or to lose a place or to want to connect. Not necessarily by, like, I wish that I would do traditional embroidery, for example. Right now, I feel my eyes are getting a little bit weaker with tiny stitches, but that's something I would love to keep in my life and in my practice. And I surround myself by pieces that maybe I didn't make, but others did, that bring that closer to me. And I try to, still sort of value fabric and yarns and threads as a medium that connects very closely to my culture.
Pachia, do you want to share?
Yeah, so many great reflections that I agree with. Um, I think, growing up, it was perhaps hard to reconcile. Um, Answering your second question of how young I was or what age I was when I realized I had this ancestry, I think, I must have been very young. But I guess coming from a Hmong household, we practiced, traditional indigenous beliefs. We had traditional indigenous beliefs, and a part of that is just a whole different worldview, right? From, say, like mainstream beliefs or even Euro-American beliefs. And so in our worldview, we have an altar in the house for our ancestors. We have an altar in the house for the spirits that protect us. And all of those things are always present and around me. And so, in many ways, I do have to reconcile moving through the world today, and not having those things living on my own and not being, at home with my mother and my father. But in many ways, I'm learning my own ways of integrating those things into my life. And, a lot of my work can be understood as being spiritual and religious as well. Because, the 3 pieces that I made very much are connected to these 3 funerary pieces that are used in the funerary process. And cloth in itself is used in many different types of ceremonial practices and put up in altars because it's seen as this malleable form and material that can transform and can transmit and can transcend in many ways. And so, yeah, I think I moved through life realizing that the past and the the future are connected in many ways because our afterlife is our ancestral homeland. So in many ways, when you move forward, you're also moving backwards. And time, is all interconnected. And so it's just a different way of understanding the world, perhaps in some ways. But in other ways, I think it makes a lot of sense to a lot of people who aren't Hmong either. And so I guess those are some of the thoughts in my mind.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're mentioning the universality. I can hear you speak about these things, and I have my own version, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
it's wonderful to see it expressed the way you both express it, because that idea of loss or land, or the idea of land, as well as the physical land, and what is in the past. Yeah, you have a beautiful practices. What's nice about your work is you are also really sharing with us the actual action of making. So the practices are, I would imagine, are helping you integrate those selves, even that, to be able to take the time to do the practices. So I think one of the other things that I wondered about is whether or not the practices that you have, not only might they help you integrate yourselves, but is there a level of comfort? I mean, Pachia, when you describe your grandmother sitting and taking the time to sit and on a stool and to do her embroidery, and as for you, for the two of you, when you do your practices, do you find yourself comforted by that? Is that, so that it has a healing aspect?
For me, very much so. Yeah. And um, I think that's an important part of, I think, the earlier question you asked, which is, like carrying on culture. It's just kind of keeping this link to the past alive in many ways. But I think I am also very interested in, um, how to do that in my own ways, or how to reshape that in ways that can be more relevant to our life experiences, our shared experiences today, the issues that are going on today. And how do we keep those forms alive and relevant for people and not relegate them, say, to the past where people might feel too constricted by them.
I think there's a perfect visual representation in the QR codes of you, integrating those two things together, which is, I think we're coding. I mean, when we talk about coding today, it's so much linked to technology, but coding and understanding codes is something that's been happening for very, very, very long time. And it is
Exactly.
a way of making sense of information, is to code
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That these are great. I will open it up to, do you have anything you want to ask each other? And one thing keep in mind, you just saw each other's work in this way. And I'm wondering, what did you notice? What did you notice about each other? So I'll give you just a minute to think about that. Dina, did you notice anything in particular about Pachia?
I really enjoyed Pachia's presentation, and I think I noticed that there are lots of small elements that come together to create something that is larger and moves it from maybe the one maker to the other makers, or opening a room for collaboration and navigation through things. It's almost like you're discovering by, accessing the QR code. Like there several steps one has to take to look and see and know more. And I
Mm,
really appreciate that.
thank you.
Because you have
Yeah.
that in your practice too, right? And people have to take several steps. Pachia, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I love seeing the correlations between our work, especially with eco printing and natural dyes, and um, thinking about heritage and history and land very much when you talk about the olive trees, and the significance of the olive trees. I don't have any specific questions, but I do love the overlaps between Palestinian culture and Hmong culture. And when you speak about embroidery, even so many of we share so many of the same motifs. And I love those overlaps. And actually, those are things I'd love to explore more and understand.
Thank you.
Mhm.
You both have very rich practices. All right, I think those are our questions for the day. Oh, I have one more question from David, which is the sessions that you will offer to the public. I assume this is for Pachia. Will those be recorded and offered through YouTube or other media open to those of us who are not local?
No, those are closed sessions. Anyone is open. They are open and free to the public if you register, but we don't record them. They're rather intimate and one-on-one. But hopefully in the future we can have online courses.
Great. Okay. And I think we have a slideshow of work that's that is in the magazine. And so I want to say a big thank you to both of you. That was fascinating and enjoyable and has given me some things to self-reflect on, as well as appreciating both of you and your practices. So thank you for being so generous. And I want to say to everyone in the audience, specifically thank you to our sponsors and to everyone who has attended today. The recording will be available on YouTube in the next week. Next Wednesday, Textile Talks hosts Japanese quilt makers, an oral history project with Now Nomura and Maren Hansen, sponsored by the International Quilt Museum. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.